All across America and around the world, this is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Welcome to Veterans Radio. I am Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today. We've got some great programs for you. I think you'll find very interesting. We always want to remind you, you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or by going to veteransradio.net, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.net. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We also want to thank Eisenhower Center. It's a brain injury recovery center. Learn more about eisenhowercenter.com. They're located in Michigan and in Florida. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. Contact us if you'd like to be a sponsor on Veterans Radio, and let's move on to our program.
So tell me a little bit more about how, a nice boy like you ended up in the military.
Yeah, exactly. So I was pastoring churches, student pastor for 3, and then pastors in the New York Conference for 7 years, and felt a call to do some clinical pastoral education, which is specialized training in a hospital setting. And so it was 1991, and I did some clinical training in a medical center in New York. I was the chaplain in the burn unit. So when you get that training, it goes into a database with our division that really oversees chaplains. That's called our endorsing agent in Nashville. And they said, you've got this specialized training. Why did you get it? And I said, well, I want to be a better counselor for my parishioners. A nursing home is going in across the street, and I just want to sharpen my skill set, so to speak. Well, that information and that training gets sent to our headquarters. And at that time, our endorsing agent was looking for United Methodist clergy to serve in the military setting. Said we were looking for chaplains, and would you be interested? And I said, well, I don't have any military background, so thank you. I'm enjoying my church, and but the military got that information, and we started to get calls from the Navy pretty regularly, and I repeatedly said, thank you for the phone call. Not interested. I'm enjoying my church. But one evening when I was at a church meeting, my wife got a phone call from the Navy. And the recruiter asked her, what do you do? And she said, I am a teacher. I teach Asian studies in high school. And they said, well, if your husband joins the Navy, you could live in the culture in which you teach. So I came home and she said, hey, I think maybe there's something for us to think about.
Wow, that's a heck of a recruiting story. Usually it's you don't quite hear it like that.
Exactly.
So was this this is one of these things too where someone goes in and says, well, I'll do one tour, and whatever it is, 29 years later you come out retired. I can't imagine you thought you were going in and you were going to stay for very long.
Well, so I signed up. My bishop at the time, of the same name, not related. So I'm Dale C. White. My bishop was C. Dale White, was not a big advocate of clergy in the military. And so the denomination interviewed me and contacted the New York conference bishop, who is since deceased. Obviously, this was 30 years ago. And I had to go and meet him. And he said, I'm not really in favor of my clergy going into a pro-war institution. And I said, Bishop White, my perception, although I'm not in the military yet, is that military chaplains are as much pro-war as hospital chaplains are pro-terminal illness, or prison chaplains are pro-crime. And he nodded his head and said, good perspective. And he approved me. And I said, Bishop, if I am in 3 years or 30 years, whatever gifts and graces and skill sets the military give me, I will come back and serve the local church. It's interesting. A lot of my buddies thought having served as the senior chaplain for Navy medicine, they thought I would go from the Navy into the Veterans Administration. In fact, I had a lot of VA contacts and could have slid right into being a senior chaplain within the VA medical system. But I remembered the promise I made to the bishop. And although he's no longer alive, I am serving my church again as a director of congregational excellence in a district here in Virginia, because of that promise that I'd made. So you'd certainly
bring a unique perspective back into the community, because so few people serve and so few people understand what a chaplain actually does, what role he or she plays. So I think it's great that you're back in the community, kind of expanding people's thoughts and horizons about what that really means, and the need to go out and minister to those young men. A lot of them are young men who are in the service.
Indeed.
So the first you enlisted about, or you became an officer in about 1990, commissioned in about 1992, I think.
Correct, 1992. Yep.
So walk us through those first. We've got decades here to cover, so you can do it shortly. But walk us through those initial tours of what a chaplain and somebody from the United Methodists is doing in that role as a chaplain.
Yeah, so before 2001, obviously, first tour was with a destroyer squadron. In fact, my first Commodore lives just about 50 miles away from me here. We've stayed in touch. So I was a young lieutenant. He was a senior captain in the Navy. And those first 2.5 years took me to the Mediterranean Sea, the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, the Red Sea. And I'd have to count probably 25 countries. If you remember, from 92 to 94, that was the 50th anniversary of D-Day. So we were doing a lot of events with countries in Europe. And I remember my wife saying, hey, we joined the Navy to see the world, and I'm in Virginia Beach and you're seeing countries all over the place. So but it was great experiences, a lot of the community relations, a lot of deck plating, so to speak, going from destroyer to destroyer. And a lot of those Navy officers that I was able to serve became 4-star admirals 20 years later. Jim Stavridis, Admiral Stavridis, was the CO of the Barry. I was his chaplain on the maiden cruise. Gary Roughhead, one of our CNOs. Mike Mullen, who ended up being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was on the Yorktown and was part of the squadron. And so it was just kind of neat to see those commanders and captains move up the ranks. From there, I fulfilled my wife's promise, or the promise I made to Linda. I said, hey, we want to go to that part of the world that you taught. So we went to Okinawa, the greatest gift in Okinawa. Of course, that was the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Okinawa. So there I was on the East Coast for the 50th anniversary of D-Day. And then we moved to Okinawa, where they're a year later, 2 years later, having the commemorations of D-Day. And we were able to participate in that. But we got a phone call as a chaplain that there was a baby born who was of mixed race that nobody wanted. And so we adopted our son, who is Okinawan and Black, and have eternal connections to Okinawa because of our son Michael, who's 25 now and works for Hilton Hotels. And because I'd done a sea tour and an overseas tour in true fashion, the Navy detailer said, well, it's time for you to come back to the States and do a shore tour at a hospital or a chapel. And so they assigned me to a tour out of Bremerton, Washington on the USS Carl Vinson aircraft carrier to deploy again. And so still a lieutenant, third tour, off I go to do a Pacific cruise and head on over to the Persian Gulf. So those were my lieutenant tours, made lieutenant commander and went to do clinical training at a medical center for a year in Portsmouth, and was scheduled to have a follow-on tour at Portsmouth Naval Medical Center. And yet I had worked for when I was with the Desron. For some reason, he remembered me. And when he became chief of chaplains, Rear Admiral 2-star Barry Black, who is now the chaplain of the United States Senate, said, hey, there was a very effective lieutenant out there on those destroyers. I'd like him to come up here to the office. And so on August 10th, 2001, I reported to the Pentagon complex to work as the operations officer for the chief of chaplains, and was there for 30 days doing turnover with my predecessor, and finished our turnover on September 10th, 2001.
And speaking of another significant anniversary date, we've just passed the 20th anniversary of September 11th, 2001. And you found yourself at the Pentagon on that day.
Correct. Mark Hendricks and I, he's a Southern Baptist chaplain, just retired, 06, and myself, the first two Navy chaplains running down onto the lawn of the Pentagon from the annex, which is on the side, the annex is no longer there, was on the west side of the Pentagon, the side that was hit. That's another story unto itself, but spent 3 years working as a lieutenant commander for the chief of chaplains, promoted to commander. They asked me, what would you like to do? I said, I'd like to go with the Marines in some fashion, maybe the Air Wing. The chief of chaplains at the time, the new chief, Father Lou Iasello, said, I think it'd be more effective with the ground infantry. And off I went from the Pentagon in 2004 to 8th Marine Regiment, and ended up in Fallujah at the beginning of 2005.
And unfortunately, that was a kind of a hot time in Iraq in 2005, 2006. Can you give us some thoughts, Pastor, on your experiences, both with the men and on the ground there in Fallujah?
Yeah, it's interesting. There was at the time a training program called CREST, Chaplain and Chaplains, CREST. It was a program to prepare chaplains to go with Marine operational units into operational settings, training, and into combat. I'd asked to go to that training. There was not enough time, and so I was assigned to an infantry unit as a commander, never having been assigned to an operational infantry unit. So I was a bit nervous. We did some training for 2 months at 29 Palms in the desert, and then off we went to Fallujah. I just had to take my basic skills, my instincts, my pastoral training, and go in there into Fallujah, realizing, hey, I am at the time I was 45 years old, going in with a bunch of 18-year-olds and saying, hey, I've had 45 years of life. These young Marines, many of them have had only 18 years of life, and I just need to use my role. I'm probably the age of many of their fathers. And I need to be a father figure. And I also have a lot of lieutenants who are first tour chaplains, and I need to care and feed them. And it's interesting, a lot of my lieutenant chaplains first tour, one just completed a tour as the White House chaplain. Many of them are commanders and captains now and remind me of how helpful I was to them. I'll share a little bit about this in just a moment. But going into Fallujah, I remember arriving.
I don't think most people understand, Pastor, what role in a combat mission the chaplains play. So can you talk a little bit about your role at Camp Fallujah for the men that you served?
Yeah, men and women. And so what's interesting is, although I looked at it as I do any role that a pastor plays, some people look at it as an incredible support, and I looked at it just as doing my job. So let me give you a couple of aspects. One is caring for your subordinate chaplains as a regimental chaplain. And so each month I asked all the executive officers to have their chaplains and RPs come to my little hut at Camp Fallujah. We would spend the morning either praying and or just reading a passage of scripture and just spend some time doing some training. And that's what we would do in the morning. And then we would fellowship and break bread together and have lunch, and then come back and either watch a movie or play horseshoes. We had an old television set and a DVD, or not a DVD, CD, but what did we call them? VHS player. So you have videotapes and just fellowship. If they couldn't get a ride back to their facilities in the evening, we would sit out and smoke a cigar together. I was never a cigar smoker. It wasn't about smoking the cigar. It was about fellowship. And so that turned into a monthly thing. And chaplains have reminded me, thank you for taking us out of combat for a day. We told our executive officers it was training, but it was really the fact that clergy spend 24/7. If you think about this, the average American works an 8-hour day, let's say maybe 40-hour work week, okay? But you're going to get the weekends off, the Monday holidays, and the month of vacation. Now go to combat. In combat, you are working probably 16 hours a day for 365 days. There is no break. You can't tell the enemy, hey, a couple of days off here, stand down. So you multiply 365 times 2. So you've got 730 work days in a year that the average person works in combat. Whereas the average American, 365 minus 100 days of the weekends. It's going to take you 3 years maybe to do the work that you do in combat. What that means is that there's a stress on the force, and a chaplain is working to mitigate the stress. So you're working within your own community, your chaplains and religious program specialists, to care for them, but you're also then providing opportunities for your Marines to also just exhale. And so we had a little Jordanian building that was just a metal building. We had Starbucks coffee brewing all the time. we had this old beater television where we were playing television. I think partway through the year, we were able to get a satellite hookup so we could have football games, a place of distraction from combat. Just something to boost the morale of our Marines. And then something that we started was cigar and movie night. Now, this just was happenstance. I was sitting with a naval gunfire liaison officer one afternoon, sitting in a couple of old plastic white Walmart chairs, having a cigar, and he and I were talking, and he said, "Oh, there's an inbound round coming in over on that side of the camp." I said, "What do we need to do?" He says, "Oh, he was trained to know and hear and estimate where these things were going to hit." He said, and a lot of the camp was wide open. And so he said, "Oh, it's going to hit over there in an open area of the base." So it hits and the sirens go off. And I said, "What do we need to do?" He said, "Well, the enemy has shot that from a mobile launcher attached to a pickup truck. That's how they operate. They have already left because we know where they were. So we're not going to get another round." In the meantime, the sirens are going off. People are running around the camp. And this lieutenant and I are just sitting calmly, smoking cigars. And I didn't realize the visual that would give to folks. A visual of calm, a visual of a peaceful presence. And so a couple of Marines came by one day and said, "Hey, you have any more of those cigars?" I said, "We're getting donations of these cigars. We got a lot of, not a aficionado of cigars. I didn't know that they were bad, dried out cigars, but they were cigars." And so a Friday night, this lieutenant and I were smoking a couple of cigars again, and 2 or 3 Marines joined us. I think at one point, it became a joke. We had about 80 Marines sitting all around outside this hooch, smoking cigars. And someone came along and said, "Hey, let's hang a sheet up. It's almost Christmas, and maybe we can project a Christmas movie on the side of a building." And it ended up being just a gathering place. And so probably a long story long is that one of the roles of chaplains is to be a morale booster, someone who provides hope. Obviously, we are there for our primary role, and that is constitutional freedom of religious provision and facilitation. So I spent a lot of time doing religious services and getting around Al-Anbar province. And then lastly, counseling. And you don't realize how powerful counseling is. I didn't realize, we're always doing counseling. And about 4 years ago, I was in Beaufort, South Carolina, having a glass of wine and eating a piece of salmon in civilian attire in a restaurant by myself. I was the chaplain of Navy medicine visiting our hospital down there, and I was alone eating. And I see this guy on the other side of the restaurant looking at me, making eye contact. And when you see someone staring at you, you get a little nervous. And I kept eating. I looked at my phone, looked up. He's still looking at me. I tried to pay no attention. I notice he pays his bill and he gets up and he walks very, very intentionally towards me quickly. And I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here? And he said, "Chaplain." And I said, "Yes, I'm a chaplain." He says, No. I know you're a chaplain. You're Chaplain White. I said, "Have we met?" He said, "You counseled me in Iraq when I was with the infantry. I'm no longer Marine." He said, "You counseled me. I was having some problems back home. I was distracted. I was melting down. You spent 6 sessions with me. You got my head straight. It allowed me to survive in that environment where I needed to be focused, and it saved my marriage. I never thought I'd see you again, Chaplain. Thank you." And I said,
"Yeah, that."
And then he left, and I didn't even get his name. He left, and I was like, "Oh, well, you're very welcome." And that's what chaplains do.
And not all of this is done on base. Not all of this, and even though the camps aren't safe, I'll say it's safe inside the wire environment. And you had a lot of experiences outside the wire that, again, give a different role to what chaplains have to deal with on a daily basis.
You know, you're out there on convoys. So 8th Marine Regiment, we were, you know, spread out all over yeah, you go where your people are. And there have been a number of stories written about me. General Mullen wrote in one of his books, Fallujah Redux. But there was an incident in June of 2005 where we lost a number of our Marines, 6 of them, 3 men, 3 women. And it was from a suicide vehicle-borne IED. And that night, there were a number of women that came to my hooch and said that they had been called to replace the women who were the entry control point women checking females coming into Fallujah. And they did not want to go out and replace the wounded or deceased Marines. And I said, well, I mean, it's your job. You're Marines, you're being ordered to do it. And I remember a couple of them saying, well, that's easy for you to say, Chaplain, you don't have to be out there with us. And I said, oh, yes, I do. And they said, oh, you were ordered? And I said, no, I have to, because you're my parishioners and you're scared and I'm going to go. And so talked to the regimental commander and we agreed it wasn't the safest time, that we had some very solid Marines and a chief warrant officer, a gunner, and I won't mention his name, but he said, I will make sure that the chaplain is going to be okay. And all I did was go out to the entry control points where the women were being dropped off to make sure that they were that they felt supported and that they were okay. And I was just out with my Marines. Now that's been written about and spoken about repeatedly as an incredibly heroic thing. Maybe I was somewhat naive as to the level of danger at that time, but my main mental mode was, as it has always been as a pastor, when I have a member of my congregation in need, I am going to go there. I think the eye-opener for me was when we drove past the site where the explosion had taken the evening before on Route Michigan, coming into eastern Fallujah, the Baghdad side. And I'd driven through there 100 times already, and yet it was a crater. The road had a crater in it. The blast was so large. And I realized, wow, this is significant. And yet when you're with this chaplain with the United States Marines, I never felt unsafe. Yes, I laid hands on multiple dead body Marines and sailors before they were shipped home. I knew the reality of the war. I saw death. I knelt by the bedside of multitudes of injured Marines. But personally, I guess I felt, hey, these are 18, 19, 20-year-olds, and I'm 45. I have lived a good life. I just didn't find myself afraid. I didn't find myself wincing or laying awake at night. I did my job, went where I needed to be with my people, prayed with them, supported them, tried to boost their morale and care for them, and then start the new day.
A couple of observations, Pastor. One is leadership comes in a lot of different formats, and sometimes you don't know you're leading, and you are. That's the cigar story, right? That's we're going to take a break. We're going to be calm. people observed that and saw leadership, even though that wasn't necessarily what the intention of the event was. And going out with the female Marines is a demonstration of leadership, pastoral care, but leadership that gave calm and presence. It does probably help to have God looking over your shoulder and a couple of Marines at your back and sides, but
right.
It's that combination that certainly helps. But ultimately, I'd like you to talk a little bit about. In my mind, it's somewhat unusual that a chaplain receives the Bronze Star. Can you tell us a little bit about that event and how you felt about receiving that award?
It's interesting. I didn't, when I was notified, let me close the door for a second. When I was notified that I was getting two different recognitions. One was the Combat Action Ribbon, which is not a medal, but it's a ribbon with certain criteria that you were present with troops in contact. That's other events where Marines were under fire, returning fire, and I was with them. But I didn't go in thinking, oh, gee, after 14 months, I'm going to probably wearing this medal or that medal. And the executive officer contacted me and said, you'll be, here's your paperwork. You have received a car. And I said, a car? What kind of a car? And he said, not a car, a combat action ribbon. I said, oh, for what? He said, well, that day in such and such a town. And I said, oh, okay, whatever. And and then the Bronze Star and Colonel, now General Berger, was there. I said, I appreciate this. Can we do this quietly in a closed room with my wife and the commanding general of the division, because Berger was a colonel at the time? I said, I just did my job. That's all I did. And
it's difficult to get guys like you to talk about this, but we talked earlier before we started recording about the importance of recording history. Sure. Whether it be your father's service that we're going to talk some more about in the future, or those at 9/11 at the Pentagon, we're going to talk another time about. But the Bronze Star is for heroic or meritorious achievement of service. So Chaplain, I'd ask you to go a little deeper into what occurred and why it was recognized.
So Silver Star is really a person running into the gunfight. To me, a Bronze Star is a meritorious service medal level in combat, and you're going above and beyond the call. Never was I really running into gunfire, but nor did I run from it. Where Marines went, I went with them, and if there was combat, well, so be it. Then I was there amongst them. So I would say I'd have to look at the citation.
I can only find one line. This is the line, and it's quote. This is the only line I could find, and it's from that BYU report. Quote, his bravery in rescuing fellow military personnel whose Humvee was ambushed in Fallujah, Iraq in 2006. End quote.
Here we go. The town was Karma. An incident in Karma, Karma, I think it was spelled. We used to call it bad karma. And there were, we were heading into Karma. There was an explosion. The Marines ended up troops in contact with the enemy. And I saw some injured Marines staggering past the Humvee. And I got out and helped them get into a Humvee to be taken back to Fallujah, to the surgical unit.
As you say, just doing your job.
That's it. Now, I remember people screaming, "Chaplain, get down, get down." The bullets were flying, the explosions, screaming. It's in war, there's chaos. Again, I didn't think of it as anything heroic. Let's get these injured Marines, get them to a vehicle, and let's get back to the camp, and get them treated. I'd forgotten about that, actually.
Well, that's again, that kind of highlights how quickly the history can be forgotten in the chaos of everything else. And
right.
And nobody does this. I've interviewed a lot of Medal of Honor recipients. Nobody does this for the awards. This isn't about self-aggrandizement. And most folks who have received Bronze Star, Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross, Medal of Honor are extremely humble folks. They were just doing their job. Somebody else might have thought it was extraordinary, but they don't. And I think from talking to you, Chaplain, that's sort of the way I take this is somebody else might have thought it was something, but from your viewpoint, it was the only thing you could do at that moment.
Taking me back to that day, then follow on, we convoyed hurriedly back to Fallujah, and had to stop. The first vehicle crossed a small bridge, which had a flour sack on it. They radioed to us to halt the rest of the convoy, and I remember us looking at the bridge with the flour sack. I had my door open. People were getting out, and somebody said, I was on the side facing the flour sack, and they said, "Chaplain, you might want to close your door." I said, "It looks just like a flour sack." They said, "No, that's an IED." I closed my door. I closed my door in time, because the flour sack was an IED. Now, I do remember the turret gunner saying later, I said, "How you doing?" He said, "Well, I learned that a chaplain's vocabulary is wider than I had expected it to." And I don't remember what I said, but I do know that there were others that were outside that were injured and got Purple Hearts. And I think just by the grace of God, somebody said, "Hey, if you'd left that door open, you might have gotten a Purple Heart." I said, God knows. Yes, right. Yeah, not necessary. And others got their eardrums blown out, and and had permanent injuries. So yeah, again, just caring for Marines, just trying to get them back. It's interesting because in that 14 months, we get a 2-week R&R. And so I arrived in around February. I remember because it was Lent, and I celebrated Ash Wednesday in February of 2005. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm going to be here celebrating Ash Wednesday in 2006. Although they do give us a 2-week, and despite everything I'd gone through, I came home the end of October, knowing that I was going to be returning February, March. Some people took their 2-week R&R early. I waited until late in my 14 months. And I remember telling my wife, I feel safe with Marines. And what I wasn't realizing, they were thinking about, was that there was a slope of activity, of insurgent activity, increasing. And so that when I got back in October, things that we had done early on, like taking our helmets off and going and watching kids play a soccer match in Fallujah, we were no longer doing that. Insurgency was ramping up again. And I remember that incident in Karma, where the initial explosion went off, and we were all outside of our vehicles, actually. The more I tell the story, the more things I remember. We were outside of our vehicles, and the explosion took place. And I remember looking up at the sky, laying on my back, saying, "Oh my, there was an explosion," and wasn't sure how Marines operate in situations like that. And yet everybody was back in their Humvees, and we were going right into the firefight, which is where the injured were, and when I got out to help them. And I think after that incident, I remember thinking, "Oh my, it's getting bad over here." And I was just home in October and told my wife, "I'll be fine." And that was when I first started to think, maybe not.
I want to just make sure I got the end.
No, I'm sorry. Let me finish up. So I finished with 8th Marines in 2007, and from 7 to 10, I was asked to be the chaplain at a new unit, Marine Corps Forces Special Operations. The Marine Corps formed their first command along with Navy SEALs and Army Green Berets. So they asked me to go to do that tour for 3 years. And then in 2010, I was sent back to the Pentagon as a Navy captain. So when I was with the Special Operations, I put on 06, went back to the Chief of Chaplain's office for a second round. Remember, I was at the Chief of Chaplain's office from 01 to 04. And now from 2010 to 2013. Basically doing strategic planning and other things for the Chief of Chaplain's office. From there, I was sent to be the Chaplain Corps detailer, the assignments officer in Memphis, Tennessee. From 2013 to 2016. And then when you're the detailer, the assignments officer, you can basically pick where you want to go next. They said, "Do you want to be a fleet chaplain? Do you want to be a senior Marine chaplain?" I said, "No, I have a passion for medicine and pastoral care. I'd like to be the chaplain of the Surgeon General of the Navy." So I went to Navy medicine in Falls Church from around January of 16 until December of 18, when I was going to retire. And yet there was a 3-star general coming to Quantico, and that 3-star general had been my 06 in Fallujah, Colonel Berger. And so I took the opportunity to work for him again as a 3-star. He was there about 5 months when he made commandant, and moved up to the Pentagon. So I finished my time as the chaplain for 2 3-star commands at Quantico and retired as of 1 September 2021.
Well, Dale, I appreciate the time you've given us.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by going to veteransradio.net. And until next time, you are dismissed.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans' Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org, Eisenhower Center, VA Ann Arbor Health Care System, the Vietnam Veterans of America Charles S. Kettles Chapter, Ann Arbor, Michigan, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423 in Ann Arbor, and the American Legion Press Corn Post 46, also in Ann Arbor. They keep us on the air, as does your support. Go to Facebook, go to veteransradio.net, and support our efforts. And until next time, You are dismissed.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.